Welcome, lords and ladies, to the Small Council. Today's agenda concerns the current chapter. We are free to discuss Areo II, Dorne, and House Dayne. Kai Shan agreed to start us off. Go ahead.
Howdy, howdy. I'm Kai Shan. I'm the Master of Ships here. I'm one of our primary editors. We're just here to talk about these amazing drafts. These were some really, really great additions here. I saw a lot of brilliant ideas swirling around. I can't wait to talk about them. I can't wait to dive into the deeper Dorne, talk about House Dayne and the future within the draft. So I'm just going to kick it over to Littlefinger, to Captain Time.
Yes, I am Littlefinger, also known as Captain Time. I'm the Master of Coin here on the Small Council, and I also just crammed through all the drafts, all 5 that have been submitted, and they are all absolutely wonderful. Loving all the little details in all of them. Big fan of House Dayne, so I'm excited to talk about that, as well as some greater Dornish Master Plan stuff here. So let's begin. Back to Nick.
So, do you guys want to start off with House Dayne?
That and just the whole Areo II outline, so everyone's on the same page. Like, if anyone's good to summarize it real quick, what the overview is. So once we get into all these drafts, it sort of makes sense because some authors took some more liberties with where they went in some parts.
Does anyone want to go over anyone want to volunteer?
I can do it if no one else does.
Yeah, you should, because my ideas were kind of out there, so maybe yours are a little bit more grounded.
Okay, so odd quick overview is there's kind of 3 sort of acts, and it's sort of an in medias race, like in the middle of things, stuff with the beginning. So we start with Obara is mortally injured, and Arrow is kind of reflecting on the fight that they just had, where they did manage to take out all the Lannisters, but they lost about 30 of their people. So they're down to about 40 or 50 people. So that's kind of the first little bit. And then they walk up to the castle. Darkstar sends out an emissary, and it's just some little girl. And Arrow's like, why are you sending this little girl? And the girl basically just says that he's not going to treat with any adults. So Arrow's now going to go as the emissary, which is where the chapter of the title comes from, or the title of the chapter comes from. And then he goes up, talks with Darkstar. Darkstar gives a bunch of exposition about House Dayne, and we get a lot more cool insights about his character, as well as some more hints about the Dornish master plan. Then they go back to the camp. Obara thinks that Darkstar is bluffing about having enough men to defend the castle, but she either dies or is incapacitated the next day, depending on whose draft you're reading. And they all then head out, and Arrow and Desiel Dalt surrender to Darkstar, who reveals that he was bluffing, and that's the end of the chapter. So those are kind of the broad strokes. I skipped out a lot of the little details because we'll get into those once we get to the actual outlines, but that's what I got out of it.
It looks like Preston's given us a fair bit of leeway to come up with theories of our own about House Dayne and politics in Dorne and whatnot.
And the White Raven subplot.
Mm-hmm. So, I'll just go. Who here has an interesting theory about House Dayne? Any volunteers?
I saw Abram go unmuted first, so I didn't want to interrupt, but...
You can go ahead. Mine's not really a theory. Mine was just more of an idea of, like, how the house functions.
That's sort of the same thing that I did. There was so much, there was so much openness that Preston gave when he uploaded the video. He said most of this is up to you. So I started from the Sword of the Morning stuff and like the little bits that we know of that, and then grew out from there. I'm not sure what your angle was.
I started.
Yeah, I can fix that.
Oh, sorry. I started from a similar place. But I already had like a. It's kind of funny. I already kind of came up with a headcanon Dayne thing like a year or two ago. So I just kind of recycled a lot of those same ideas. Which was that the Sword of the Morning kind of it's more of like a democratic position. So like members of the house have to somebody elects a member of the house as a candidate, and then the members of the house then vote for or against the candidate. And so, from a political perspective, like House Dayne is kind of egalitarian, so it has sort of that first men attitude mixed with Dorne. It's a little weird. I wanted to have like that interesting thing. I ran into an issue with it when it came to like kind of making Illyria make sense as to why Darkstar isn't sort of the morning. But the idea was more of House Dayne is really large and it's has a democratic thing, but they're at a weird point because their lord is a child and he's lost in the Riverlands, and so there isn't really a strong leader aside from Illyria, but most people don't really like Illyria because she's kind of a butthole. But that was me. Sorry. What was your idea, VCR?
So yeah, what I gathered from what was the battle that Arthur Dayne like protected the small folk in? That was like the point where he was given the title Sword of the Morning.
Are you referring to the Battle of the Kingswood where he defeats the Laughing Knight?
Yes, exactly. So I latched onto that, and I used that as the basis for to be Sword of the Morning. You have to protect those who cannot protect themselves. So now that Edric Dayne is gone, and there are no other, in my version anyway, there are no other male Danes around. Darkstar kind of sees himself as, well, I'm the only one left, and somebody has to do this. A bit of entitlement and a bit of the inferiority complex toward Arthur comes through there. I really wanted to draw some parallels to the Tower of Joy in my chapter. I forget how exactly I worded it, but the line where they say we were not at the Trident. If we had been, the usurper would lie beneath the ground, which I think is from the show. I don't think it's exactly like that in the book, but I used a similar line. Anyway, the Sword of the Morning being the base point of everything is where I got the idea for the cadet branch of House Dayne and High Hermitage sort of being where, people who have been seriously injured in war or are very sick, they wind up at House Hermitage, and it's the cadet branch's duty to protect them. So the Sword of the Morning protects them, in the field, and then once they get home, they're protected by the cadet Danes. And that's where I made the house words of the cadet branch, rest here before dawn. I think that's... I don't know if I just rambled too much or if I came to a point.
No,
You're good.
You're good. I've read both of your because you both submitted drafts, and you had two very different but still quite interesting interpretations of what the Sword of the Morning should be. Either like this democratically chosen position, which is a lot of like it leans very much into the political side of things, and then VCR you had the sort of like honor-based system. I know that's being a little reductionist. And then you also mentioned the Laughing Knight, which Rhoyne had heavily featured in one of the sections that I talked about. But I quite enjoy like the different interpretations, and it really makes me wonder what Preston's going to settle with, because there are a few others. Personally, I didn't ever really have any cool deep theories on what gives the Sword of the Morning to any specific knight, or just an honor family-based thing. So I'm really enjoying this interpretation so far.
Yeah, I wanted to have
I quite enjoy like the different
there be
interpretations.
sort
and
of
it really
strife
makes me
between
wonder what
Darkstar,
Preston's
because like
gonna
for
settle
him,
with, because there are a few
he's
others.
Lord of High Hermitage in my draft.
Personally, I didn't
He was
ever
given
really
that
have any cool deep theories
following
on...
the Danes' participation in quelling the rebellion, but the Lord I have is Lord Alexander Dayne. That's like the grandfather of everybody, / father of like Ashara, Arthur, and Illyria. Darkstar wasn't necessarily expecting to be named Lord of Starfall or Sword of the Morning. He would maybe like he hoped he would have been, but neither happened, and instead he was just given High Hermitage, which was like a pretty much unimportant tiny little castle that they either gave to like second or third sons who either like just really messed up. So it went through. I didn't really put that in the draft, but my idea for High Hermitage was just like this is kind of where we send the people that we kind of just want to ignore, and then and there's some other stuff that I wanted to put in that like I couldn't really find a way to weasel in, but I really wanted to like make Darkstar kind of House Dane is a really complicated like house just because it's so large and there isn't really a lord, and I wanted to like, well, there is a lord. He is in the Riverlands. He has some interesting heritage. We'll see where that goes, but
And that,
it's all it goes crazy. Sorry, I'm going off.
you're good. And that's just kind of highlights the openness of House Dane, because High Hermitage, like I just pulled up his wiki page, there's literally 2 sentences on it. All we know is it's the seat for one of the cadet branches. Some of the drafts had it be like this very impressive and fortified castle. Others, like you, seem to have it more as kind of a side point that was not as desirable or powerful as a castle. Um, and again, kind of a lot of openness here, but that's what's nice about having an outline about House Dane, is because there's just so much room for interpretation.
You It's really funny you say that because I was convinced. I was absolutely convinced that High Hermitage was going to have like all this World of Ice and Fire history written down that I could draw from. And then I opened the wiki and I was like, fuck. Fuck.
Yeah. No, I had the same thing when I was like researching, like, oh yes, this really cool castle. Nope, we got one fantasy flight drawing and one mention in the appendix.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure. Rhoyne mentioned to me that having a moat wouldn't make sense because then it wouldn't be high in the mountains. And I was like, you're absolutely right, but I don't know what high means in the name of the castle. I have no idea what it means. So I was thinking of it as high in concept rather than actually physically high. Whereas Rhoyne was thinking the opposite, that it was high up in the mountains, and that's why it was defensible. It's really interesting, like, how little House Dane has been given this whole time for being so
So
like
yeah,
important and prestigious and all this
maybe
stuff.
important somehow, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to speak for Royne, but his draft seemed to feature that interpretation that you had mentioned, that High Hermitage is this like Vale-like castle that's he had the walk up it take like 3.5 hours just to cross the bridges and everything.
Yeah, which I really
Um,
like that.
which is I like it too, but I don't feel like a cadet branch's seat would be that impressive. Like I feel like the castle should be more on the lame side of the spectrum, but that's just my personal interpretation.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I really wasn't sure. And actually I originally because I was trying to figure out why initially I thought they were treating out in the front of the castle, but then as I was listening to the outline a few times to like get an idea of my plan, Preston mentioned they were on the drawbridge. Uh, so I was like, okay, why would it have a drawbridge? So initially they were actually on a drawbridge across like a ravine. But then I was thinking of High Hermitage is smaller, so I wound up cutting that and making it I was like trying to figure out like what the Torrentine would have to do with everything, so I wound up just looking at River Run and basically copying the sluice gates open up the moat and everything.
I went with having basically the drawbridge be like if you pull up the drawbridge, there's no way to actually access the castle. So that was my interpretation. But I wanted to mention something about like House Dondarrion and House Dane because they're linked obviously through Illyria and Barrack, but I was reading through the Hedge Knight, and what stuck out to me is that Duncan's mom is a Dane, and his cousin is half Dondarrion. So I think like in the past the houses were in a much stronger position politically, and then 80 years later they're kind of like on the lower end, kind of. I don't know. I was like thinking about that, and as to where like how powerful would House Dane be at this point, especially given the fact that like Arthur's dead. Their lord is a boy lord. I'm not saying like we don't know much about Blackhaven, but like it doesn't seem like the death or disappearance of Beric into the Riverlands has affected the Stormlands that much. So, like, and then also the Blackhaven is literally right next to Starfall, so the marriage is both political and it also makes sense. But it's interesting to like if we see marriage pacts as equalizing the power of a house that like 100 years ago they were marrying Targaryens, and then 100 years later, they're not. But also that could be seen as creating allyships in order to blockade against the Blackfire Rebellion, since House Dane is maybe one of the largest armies, and Blackhaven pushes the Dornish away from the Stormlands. So their stock has risen, sort of. I don't know. It's interesting to think about that now. Sorry for going off.
No, it is an interesting thing, and something I actually want to discuss with not only you but the other drafters is I saw a lot of different depictions of High Hermitage itself and actually the Torrentine Valley in general. Some of y'all had a lot more of a desert vibe to it, like the Red Mountains really leaned into that, and others leaned into like the Torrentine is like the main river in Dorne apart from the Greenblood, and so there was a lot of orchard imagery, a lot more temperate like climate, if you will. Like how much of that played into your understandings and the writings of the scenes, the tones that you were trying to evoke within those passages? Because I really found those different views incredibly compelling.
Yeah, I thought of things as being temperate, in large part because I was writing and I decided, what if the house with the red doors in High Hermitage? And I wound up doing that. So I was like, well, it needs to be warm because of Lemon Gate and all that. The lemon tree needs to be able to grow there. Uh,
You're not alone on that front. I've seen that idea floating around in a few.
Lemons are dropped in almost every. Yeah.
yeah.
But no, like physically
Which
having a house with a red door in it.
yeah. I wasn't. Yeah, I feel like I've read everybody's draft once and I have them all in front of me, so I may have missed it, but I was like, man, I really think this is an original idea. How exciting! But I'm sure other people have also had it. Who specifically had it? Because I'd like to take a look at it.
It was in Royn's draft.
In
His
Rhoyneffff's draft.
Yeah, it was like a really subtle. It was like a little tower. I don't know if he had like the red door in it or not, but I think he had the same imagery.
Right. Yeah.
I think I suggested like the house was like a. He said that the house was like abandoned or something, and like it was just
Right.
desolate. And then like I suggested maybe putting like flakes of red paint on the floor or something like that. Thought that might
Yeah.
be interesting.
Yeah, and I think, not to move too far away from like the climate and everything. I think that's an interesting and logical idea because the Danes seem to be so wrapped up in Ned looking back on the Tower of Joy and visiting Starfall is tied up in thinking about Daenerys and her being assassinated. So I'm like, yeah, I mean, where would they go? What kind of allies do the Targaryens have? And it's like the Danes probably. It seems like the Danes are pretty involved in all that. But anyway, a lot of my ideas also came from the chat as well, from the Discord. Somebody mentioned, uh, like how did the people here like create commerce or anything, and somebody mentioned it being wine country, which partially influenced putting fruit trees in the courtyard, and as well as the half towers. Those came from Bob, who I haven't seen him mention anything in the Discord recently. But he had the idea for the half towers, and I took that from him and adapted that.
Can you explain more about the half towers? Because I remember reading that and being like, why is he describing these half towers in such depth? Just curious.
So the idea would be that since the whole crux of Hota and Desiel surrendering is that they're not confident. They're not confident that they can beat him anymore now that they've lost all these numbers. And a big part of that is they don't know how many men he has in High Hermitage. So Bob mentioned it. I don't remember which chat it was in. I think it may have been current chapter. But the idea would be that they obscure how many people are actually in High Hermitage, and then once you take the wall, it could be 10, 20, 50, 100 people inside will shoot you the moment you're on the wall because you're out in the open.
Okay.
That was kind of the idea. Yeah, Bob put up. I will paste this image into our chat here, so everybody can see. This is kind of the basic idea. The crenellations are only on the outside, so once you have taken the wall, you have no defense from archers on the ground.
Okay. That's interesting. Pretty neat idea. It would be, not to get too off topic, but we could also talk a little bit about that bluff, because I know a few people took different approaches on how Darkstar was lying. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's in chat, LouDiPhilla, or how had Kotal tell Desiel that he had actually, Darkstar had shown him the 250 meant that he had, and then Darkstar is, or not Darkstar, Hota is given a lot more agency in actually bringing Desiel to his imprisonment, which is I like that as a point of like character activation, but no one else kind of went that route.
Well, there was also a draft that specifically mentioned saw 7 archers on the battlements like 3 or 4 times, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant, where it was completely laying out in front of the reader that there are actually only 7 guards here.
Yeah,
And
that's what I
Yeah.
did. I
yeah,
mentioned the
that was
6
really
archers, and so then when he gets back to Obara's like, "What are you, a fucking idiot? You saw 6 people. All you saw
right.
was 6."
I thought that was great.
It was, and I think I'm having a hard time keeping the draft straight. I know you're not the only one who did it, but yeah, you're the one who might have done it like the most overtly, mentioning it a bunch of times. I remember one person had him see 6 archers on the wall as well, and then they kind of mentioned that in passing. There's a lot of little similarities. I can tell everyone's reading each other's drafts and talking in the same chats, which is good that we're working off each other.
And so, as we're on the topic of reading each other's drafts and working off of each other, and for this, I'd honestly want to hear Rhoyne and Lou as well, and Meredith if they ever join. Where do we actually see the Danes going in A Song of Ice and Fire? What do you think the role of the Sword of the Morning should be? And is there someone that you think should be the Sword of the Morning in the coming story? And I know those are a lot of questions that I'm just throwing out there. It's a bit of a loaded
Mhm.
pocket of questions, I'm aware. But I would like to know where we're sort of coming as a community about the Danes' purpose here.
If anyone, I know some people in the chat don't have mics or they can't speak for one reason or another. If you guys send me stuff, I'll read out what you guys have to say.
I'll start off with my crazy ass idea if that's okay.
Feel free.
Please, more the crazier the better.
So the thing I had kind of permeating throughout the chapters, like the Ned Ashara thing, and I wanted to establish the mystery of Edric's parentage, which is like kind of obvious and it makes no sense. But I wanted it to be a mystery because it makes no sense. Why would, you know, who is that? Who is Edric's parents? But my idea for it is, if I were to write like a crazy ass chapter, would probably be Edric and the God's Eye, or and the Isle of, fuck, I forget what isle it's called.
The Isle of
The Isle of Faces. And it's working off a previous idea that I had, which is that Edric goes to the Isle of Faces and kind of opens his third eye, I guess, and because he's already there, he's already in the river, he's missing, and so he'd kind of like open his third eye and he'd have all these experiences and kind of get connected to the hive mind of the Faces there, and that would work against like kind of Bran's chapter, I guess. And so the idea that I had is like Darkstar is in a position where he can't like they have to get Egham to side with Areo and Darkstar have to get Egham to side with Doran so that both of them don't die because like Areo probably doesn't want Darkstar to die for something he didn't commit. Like he doesn't want to die. He doesn't want him to be sentenced to death for murders he didn't commit. And that's the only like end either could have with Lannisters. But if it's Egham, they could reposition what's been happening in Dorne as like oh, we've been killing two with the Kingsguard and we have control of Myrcella, one of the crown princess, and we could do whatever with her. And so I think that's kind of like the future that Darkstar has, which is like adventuring with Areo or like trying to get Egham to ally with Doran. And on the Edric end of it, I don't know, probably do some weird green seeing stuff there and probably come back to Starfall.
I like it how like the moment you said the Edric going to the Isle of Faces, everybody everybody unmuted themselves. Did you guys want to say something about that?
Oh, I would just love to jump in on that. That's actually something very close to a thought I've had for a long while about the ending of the story in general, not in the sense of Winds of Winter, but even in the sense of like A Dream of Spring. If we ever did
The
get that
song.
far, right, the song, it would be, at least for my own idea or headcanon, I kind of imagine that it's Bran ruling Westeros from the background, from the Isle of Faces, drawing things back to where it all began. And at least to me, just the image of Sansa or somebody approaching in a lone boat coming up from Harrenhal, reaching the shore, and then Edric Dayne, who's been missing for however long, is just there in a white cloak. Still a young boy, but guarding an even younger boy, and proclaiming this is like our king of the first men of the old ways, and that we have, yeah.
Sounds similar to one of Preston's proposed finishes to the song. Is that where you got it from?
It may actually be. I believe that Preston was discussing ending the story on the Isle of Faces with Bran a little while ago. I think that was a couple of years back, but
Yeah.
I've seen that in
So
other places, and that's always resonated with me.
so I'll retell because I don't think many people have heard about this, and I'll just retell it in case people haven't heard. And I'm
Please,
probably gonna get half of this wrong because I think half of it's merged with my own ideas. Um, the war is over. There's King Bran, and there's King Bran has the Children of the Forest have won. He's an instrument of them, and he is I think this theory of his was before he came up with the time traveling Bran stuff. But anyway, Weirwoodnet is nearly destroyed along with so much of humanity. Westeros is a pile of like a rubble. Weirwoods are weak. Final scene is a Sansa chapter. She goes to the lake, the shore of the God's Eye. A man appears on a boat, hooded and cloaked. They don't say who it is, but everyone assumes it's Howland Reed. She sails off into the God's Eye to join the Weirwood Net, and we are left to wonder what happens when that happens. Does Sansa, as a personification of innocence, change the Weirwood Net? Can she bring about a better way? Kind of harking back to what Preston did once say, that he thinks, and I agree with him, the most important chapter in the series is the Sansa after the Blackwater, where she tames the Hound and she makes him into like she teaches him a gentler way, and the story would kind of reflect that in its conclusion. If I remember right, that was one of Preston's endings, but it's probably merging with my own.
it was, and it's also thematically something that rings of Sansa's idealism and reflective of George's idealism. The world is supposed to be righteous and good, and we hope for a good world and a better world. And Sansa, for all that she's been through, still wishes to turn the world to that ideal of good. And within that, by her joining the Werewood Net potentially, leaving it open ended, of course, but in that finality, you did have the opportunity for someone who could still idealize a better world apart from the darkness that surrounds so much of what we know as Westeros. And I actually really do think it would be a very good idea to tie in another very pure character that we've seen, Edric Dayne, who's been nothing but, a good boy, so to speak, throughout this whole story, into that. So I really do like that idea.
Yeah, I was probably gonna write like a crazy chapter where he's like connected to the werewolf, and it was probably just gonna be like it was gonna be like a because his name is Ed, so I was gonna have him in the werewolf and in the past reliving a memory of Ned.
That's it is out there, but I still kind of like it. When I read all your Ned Ashara stuff, I was just kind of assuming it was like Ned Ashara John like stuff, but
That's what I want kind of people to think, but reality, like my idea is that well, because in my draft I have Illyria, Arthur, and Ashara as Blackwood Danes,
yeah,
and so there'd be like I kind of don't necessarily even want Edric to be specifically fathered by anybody. Like I'd rather if Preston takes anything and he does take my Edric ideas, then I just want that to be like super open. It's like who is his father? It's like, well, I mean, doesn't really necessarily matter. He's in the God's Eye. His dad could be Alexander. You look up to Darkstar's father. Like who is his father? It doesn't matter. What matters is he's in the Isle of Faces and the boy is changing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's I've said everything I wanted to say about like my weirdo ideas. Probably like Darkstar. I don't know because the Sword of the Evening exists as a title, so maybe like if Edric does play into the story, maybe that's kind of where Preston's wanting to push him towards.
That's interesting.
I don't remember Sword of the Evening. Where's that from?
That is from what's his name? The
It's,
last Dane
yeah,
king.
Yeah. It was King Vorian.
It was one who sacked the Hightower, as I recall.
Yeah, I think they called him Sword of the Evening because he lost, I believe, in the end. I thought that was what it was, but I may have misunderstood. Yeah, he was defeated by Nymeria, and I think they called him Sword of the Evening for that reason. I did actually have Darkstar mention that, but it was more because Darkstar is edgy and would like to be called something to do with evening rather than morning.
I had something similar to that, like the tiny child saying that about him, and I was like, that's kind of too. It's kind of too cringe. All his cringe exists in other ways. Vorian was renowned as the greatest knight of all of Dorne, so he's a guy, and his son Davos married what's her face, Nymeria. So I don't know. My idea is like probably as a result of what happens thereafter with like Areo and Aegon and Dorne, he either becomes Sword of the Morning or Sword of the Evening. I'm gonna quit because I think I'm dominating the conversation. Thank you for letting me talk.
I actually do have one last question for you that goes back to climate, and it moves into something else I wanted to talk about personally. You, Abram, were the only person that like ended with something after the "Where do septas go" line, which is something I want to talk a lot about. It, but you had after "Where do septas go," the snow begins to fall. I just wanted to ask about that because that was like an interesting inclusion. If it was just a basic like winter is coming thing, because you had mentioned that a few times.
I don't think I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned the snow begins to fall. I did Darkstar's.
Am I confusing your drafts?
Yeah. I had Darkstar's eyes growing wide of realization.
Okay, sorry. So do you then have an idea of what "Where do septas go" actually means then? If you have
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
My headcanon is that House Dane has like a deep distrust towards the Hightowers in Oldtown due to like past sackings. I made a whole Google Doc. I created a story where like 1 second. Okay. They don't trust maesters, so instead they send a common Dane. So they have a huge House Dane is huge. They marry common people. They marry knight. Like there's no sort of distinction aside from like the lord family being kind of the main family. So the cadet branches are really just the rest of the family. So they don't trust maesters, so instead they send a common Dane to be trained at the Citadel. And right before they become a full-fledged maester, they leave for Starfall. This has been going on for generations to go for what they do. And they also don't trust Oldtown with their scepter or anything. So they send common Danes to go get trained as septons and maesters. So for
It's interesting.
yeah, the story of Master Nolan is the maester. He was trying to poison a member of the family that he didn't like. He was successful, but he also gave him the antidote. And so for that, House Dane only boiled him in water for a minute, and then Maester Nolan served faithfully to the Danes for generations after. And thereafter, they've had like a deep distrust of any maester or septon. So my idea is that it would like where septas go immediately made me think of the septa that's with Egham, and I wanted to tie that in thematically with the theory that she's Ashara.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I took it. I don't know necessarily if like that is really what Preston had in mind, but it's what I came up with.
Yeah, I personally don't know what Preston has in mind, but I had like one theory and then I built on it, just like talking about it in a few chats right before it happened. Tyene Sand is not really a septa, but currently like disguised as one. Some people think she is. The idea being that either Myrcella or someone of importance is with Tyene, and that's what Darkstar is inquiring about, but also that this ties into Lemore somehow. Um, be that like not consciously Photon knowing that Lemore exists, but thematically tying to the idea that Lemore is somehow tied to the Dornish in some way, or that whole Targaryen ambition side of things is linked back to some greater conspiracy. That was just kind of where I was going with it, Tyene and Lemore, but I was curious to hear what other people thought because it is a very overt and noticeable line. Preston likes to either start or end with a very obvious parallel to some other chapter.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
kind of
curious.
incongruous. It just sort of comes out of nowhere.
It is. So I was curious. It clearly needs to carry some importance for it to make sense, and I was curious if anyone had any other theories.
Right. The big question to me is what is the significance of it to Areo? Because
Yeah.
it may have significance to Gerald. That makes sense. But what is the meaning of the septa to Areo? Is he right? Is he making a poke at Tyene? Is he trying to say something with that? There was the draft that had Septa Samantha. That was really original. I liked
That
how
was, yeah, something.
that was at least a groundwork of something that exists within the chapter itself to sort of set Ario's mindset in looking out for a Septa figure. But I am really, again, going back to our last conversation, I really do want to know Preston's mind on that. That's a very important thematic beat that he wants us to end the chapter off on, and we don't really have any clear motive for Aereo
Mhm.
stating that question. So, yeah, I
I
would
think
love.
in this situation, it may just be like for the next chapter that line to be in there. Like it may just be like I need to foreshadow this, so I'm gonna make sure they end on this line. And it's one of those things that we don't necessarily need to know, but at the same time, yeah, it's a strange line in the midst of Darkstar pulling back the curtain and being like, "Yeah, I was bluffing." It seems like a really weird and out of place moment.
I have two theories. I think the first is that it connects to the Eris Oakheart theory that Preston came up with like years ago. I think like he ended it with like, oh, so where's Myrcella? I was like, I don't know, probably with a Septa. Like that's the only person that Eris would have trusted. So I think that's what he's trying to connect it to. And then the second thing is that I think he wanted us to be like, oh, Septas go. Okay, so we're gonna be building up to like the maybe he's thinking about so Aria's thinking about like Septas or I don't know something. I think he was like wanting us to fill in the gaps as to what that means personally. But
Yeah,
he has his own draft, so I guess we'll see more of that in his own. And then we'll, like,
I do agree with what Ryan said that I think part of that is like this whole plot is kind of like moving toward Oldtown or not, maybe not this entire plot, but certainly Myrcella is probably moving toward Oldtown. It's probably that, but I also agree, like, when Areo is imprisoned, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he'd be trying to figure out where septas go, because now he's a prisoner. Which is that's part of the reason where at the end of my chapter, I have Darkstar treat Areo like a guest and Desiel like a prisoner, instead of them both as prisoners.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on what you were saying about Myrcella's story going to Oldtown? What makes you feel like Myrcella's story is going to Oldtown? If I can go back on that. And Captain
Agreed.
Time, please don't let me interrupt you. I also want to hear what you had to say there.
I don't think Myrcella specifically, like, it's like significant that she herself is in Oldtown, but I think it makes sense for if it may. I got from the Prince's Justice that maybe Tyene is the one with Myrcella, and she's taking her to Oldtown because Sorella can like harbor her or be a go-between for her. That's what I got from it, and I think that's convenient because they'll be there for the Battle of Blood when Euron shows up. So it's like another like crux of the whole thing is like, oh shit, Myrcella's right in the line of fire here. That's the sense that I got. I'm not sure if everybody else has that similar perception of it.
Didn't Doran tell us where she was being sent? Didn't he say she was going to like King's Landing? Or am I confusing her?
Well, the idea would be, wouldn't the idea be that Rosamond is actually the one that's being sent to King's Landing then, since Myrcella
Hmm.
isn't the one who got cut in this version?
Right, and it was you, right, that had Myrcella being there at the house with the red door. Was that in your draft? Where Myrcella made that appearance at the house with the red door?
I had she was I had her look like better off than she was when she was the envoy. So Areo thinks that it's Myrcella because she's wearing a nicer dress and she's been cleaned up and everything. But I did word it a little weird where he thinks it's Myrcella, he's convinced it's her, and then realizes again it's the same girl.
Right, okay, that makes a lot more sense, because that was a very interesting bit of it, and I could tell that you were specifically trying to word things in a way that might throw off the reader, and so I was interested to hear your actual take on what was going on in that passage, so thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
I just circle back to the whole "where do septas go" line. Then I know this was touched on, but it seems again like what we had talked about last time, where it's kind of thematic or textual parallel merely for its own sake, without much of a cause. Now, Rhoyne did really give a good build up to like talking to a septa and having like septas be politically involved, and then it'd be this whole realization that Arrow comes to. But it seems to come out of the blue, both in Preston outlines and all the other drafts that I read, where it's sort of a non sequitur. It's just kind of there to kind of end the chapter with a bang. And sure, it does, but it also, because it doesn't logically follow, it doesn't really hold the same weight or suspense for me. I don't know if anyone else felt the same way. You were saying that maybe it was there so that we would write our own ways into how Arrow comes to that conclusion, but still, like,
Yeah, I don't like it.
I don't, I no, it's way too overt. Like, it doesn't convey any meaning because there's no meaning given to it. I mean,
Well,
we
there
have
is
like
the
we
there's the
have like
previous line. Sorry, go ahead.
saying we have like different working theories on what it could be, and it could be building towards something well. But for it to build towards something well, Arrow Hotah is a pretty simple-minded POV. So he needs to his thought process needs to be simple. He can't be making these large logical jumps that the readers aren't privy to. as a narrator. That's just not his style of POV. Now I know Preston's been doing a lot of good changes with Arrow, and the writers have really been running with that. And these 2 chapters have really developed him as a character, but his thought process still needs to be transparent to the reader. Even if wrong, it still needs to be laid out for us to understand. Anyway, that's my rant about that. Go back.
I couldn't agree more with that. Like, the simplicity of Arrow's thought pattern is the hallmark of his chapters. And it's a lot more observance and quiet inner reflection on things he's absorbing. He's not putting things out into the world just for the sake of voicing an inner thought. He really only speaks if he's spoken to, which is part of what made every single one of the draft chapters' interactions with Darkstar so compelling, as you had those 2 different types of characters, Darkstar being roguish and chatty, and Areo being very reflexive and ponderous. But specifically because he's someone that is heavy and ponderous, there should be a lot more lead up to that. He's not the sort of character that can sort of hide away a plot point in the corner of his mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I was going to say a little bit earlier about the final line, where do septas go? Immediately before that, I do believe Preston does, before that, they're talking about Myrcella, and so it probably does refer to Tyene, and he's answering Arrow's question in the form of another question, which is, she's going to be, yeah. He's answering in the form of another question.
That's a fair point. LouDiPhilla, that's just what I'm going to call him. I don't know how to actually pronounce his username. Just popped in the chat that he thinks that the septa is I don't know how to say her name. Eglantine.
Septa Lamore?
Septa Eglantine. Like Myrcella's personal septa, who we knows goes with her to Dorne. I just pulled up her wiki page. She's got a pretty short wiki page as well. She does some stuff. She helps disguise Myrcella, and then she goes with Myrcella to Dorne. So it makes sense that she could be involved with Myrcella's body swap or anything else like that. Which, cool theory. Yeah, it's just it doesn't like logically follow. How does Hota even know about her? And if he does, like, why did we not get that mentioned in any Hota POV?
I think we got a little bit of it in the Prince's Justice. We got either Balon Swan or the Scrape Sword was like asking around about a blonde girl with a septa. Now why they would know, like, to be looking for her with a septa is not clear, but Obara mentions that and she like pulls Hota to the side, and I was like, what the fuck is this about?
Well, that is true. The Scrape Sword was seen in a lot of seps in the Prince's Justice. It makes specific notice that he goes to the seps a lot, and Areo is specifically taking note of that. So that is actually a very good point to VCR's wise deduction there.
I think they're supposed to be trying to make more like a facility, like where do septas go? It's supposed to be something that's on his mind. Like, where's and then also like, is the Scrape Sword supposed to be dead?
Yes. No, not specifically. The Scrape Sword got disarmed by the Knight of
Yeah, he runs
Lemonwood.
off.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think because I remember him saying like we're supposed to try and show like the change from him just kind of being a guy with an axe to a detective. It would make sense if like the story sort of switched from like Areo solitary, kind of figuring out like what the best thing to do, to him kind of like Areo and Darkstar best friends off doing detective work. I don't know. That's the vibe I get. Like, smooth talking, like very talkative Darkstar, and then kind of like smooth brained, yet still thinking Areo. I think that was maybe the vibe that he's trying to go. I don't know. I'm probably gonna do a second draft now with like everything he's talking about. Is it not?
Oh no, that does work, and they popped in again and said that was kind of the point they were going for. That Arrow does figure that out, and I guess that sort of works. Like, if you view like the axe as his sort of symbolism of having, being the simple fighter versus being like the detective, he gives up the axe when he goes to talk to Darkstar on the bridge or wherever, and then I think every draft has him reach for the axe and then realize it's not there after Darkstar mentions or produces his sword.
Do you guys mind if I swap subjects? There's a point I want to bring up.
Okay, feel free. Feel free.
Any protest?
No, by all means, please, Lord Hand.
All right. So there was an interesting point has been brought up to me by someone in the Discord. Well, it was Pieces. So Pieces mentioned this, and a lot of people brought it up. And in some of the I know in Rhoyne's chapter, he changed he did this. The question is, should Obara die? And in Preston's outline, Obara is dead, and we don't know what caused it. Here's what Pieces had to say. Not that she needs an arc, but mortality doesn't have much power in the force of a change in perspective. The folly of the entire Martell family has been that, what are you willing to risk? Really means, what are you willing to lose? Obara has been willing to risk, i.e. lose, her own life and those of her soldiers, not to mention enemies. What she hasn't thought about is living with the consequences. So he's kind of saying is, why should we kill Obara? She hasn't finished any arc. She's kind of just Preston's kind of just throwing away a character that he may not know what to do with. Maybe he has another plan, but that's what seems to some people that I've been reading, and that the idea goes that Obara needs to survive, and I'll just go on a few more theories, and you guys tell me what you think about this. Obara becomes a Vulture King and attacks Oldtown, and the whole Areo plot goes further west. Or at least her plot does, and she splits with Oreo. I don't know.
So, this is gonna sound quite disparaging toward Preston, but I don't mean it this way. But you know how in the show, when they ran out of shit for Barristan Selmy to do, he died? I think Preston just isn't quite sure what he wants to do with Obara and is like, I'm more interested by Areo. I think it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know what to do with her. And also, I think it hinges on why would Areo would not surrender if Obara, who is commanding him, orders him to fight. But I do think he would surrender, especially if he had convinced Desiel Dalt to surrender, if nobody was ordering him not to. So I think a part of it is Preston wants Areo to be in Darkstar's hands for some reason. We don't know what that reason is yet. Possibly just to have ammo to like blackmail or fight against Doran. But I think the main thing is he wants Darkstar to have Areo, and I think a mechanism for making that happen more smoothly is just got to kill Obara. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I went with it because I think that was the thought process. I'm sorry. I did bring up the show killing
you're
Selmy.
fine.
I'm apologizing in the chat. They're upset about Barristan Selmy, which I am too. It's a shame.
I think that was probably from George's notes, but that's a side issue.
Yeah.
I have a theory. I think it's that he's killing Obara because like the story would get too big. You know, you have Obara Vulture King. It's like so you have to either have Areo and Darkstar be dealing with that, or just something.
Well, she could just attack Oldtown with everyone else, because in Oldtown we have a whole bunch of armies appearing, and Obara, she talked previously about wanting to attack Oldtown, and Euron's there, and Sam is there, and I think the Brave Companions are there, and so are some Glass Candles, and George loves armies at the last, surprise armies at the last second appearing, and it was kind of set up that she does want to attack Oldtown, so I think that's where people are going.
Yeah, and I
do
think
that, yeah.
I think that is highly possible. That I don't know that I don't know that I believe that Obara's death was merely for meta reasons. It could just be that she doesn't have plot armor. People do die, and two people will die in the Winds of Winter. I could just see her being, she was one of the 60 people. Half of them or so died, so she died. But I'm not too sure. If she were to stay alive, I kind of like the idea that she goes somewhere like back to Dorne or somewhere safe, and she's kind of just a cripple in bed, and she watches her family just dissolve around her. Preston loves the idea of a big Dornish plan, but he also says that the more thought out a plan is, the larger it will fail. So that, and just a lot of people thinking that all of Doran and the Martell plans will just crumble and fall to dust. And then Obara kind of witnesses that and has to come to terms with the whole idea for vengeance or personal ambition to, sacrifice lives for a greater goal is not really worth it. I think that could be a cool arc, but I don't know that. That's just kind of a personal theory.
Yeah, go
please.
ahead, Lee.
Well, to jump off of what Captain Time is discussing, something that I thought was very compelling throughout all the drafts was how Obara began to more and more resemble Maria Martell, the Yellow Toad, in at least her outward appearance. And I thought that was a very interesting sort of thematic through line to the way that a lot of the imagery of House Martell is sort of built around, where they really revere and they look up to Maria Martell for what she did in keeping them independent. As disgusting and as um, ruthless as her tactics were to maintain their independence, they still look up to her as a role model. And I sort of saw her turning, at least outwardly, into a picture of her um, as the story went on. And that's something that if we do continue to see Obara stay alive, that would be an area that I would like to see explored, whether as the Vulture King or as something else. Where what does she view of the family legacy, and how do each of the Sand Snakes independently of each other view the family legacy? And would she continue trying to live that out as she sees it? That was just sort of a thought that came across my mind as I was confronted with the prose concerning her decay over and over again, reading all the different drafts. So I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
That's actually a happy accident. I didn't know who Miriam Martell was. I was just thinking her skin might be getting a little jaundiced because her organs are punctured. But that's really interesting. Now I wish I had done that on purpose.
Just say you did.
I love it when that happens. When someone goes to your draft and they're like, "This is a brilliant connection," and then you just lean back and you're like,
"Yep, absolutely.
Yes,
I'm a
I
fucking
totally."
genius, man. I am a genius."
260 chest right here, gentlemen. It's almost like the going of a master plan along.
You love to see
So-
it. You really do.
So there's another comment I'm seeing. In the outline, Preston alludes to Obara being poisoned or something. Did anyone do anything with that? LouDiPhilla says that in his chapter he introduced a character familiar with poisons.
I need to go back and check. I don't remember anything. I remember the injuries being described different ways, and some could be more poison based. But
Wasn't that
I'm
the
gonna
corpse
go.
there, I
I'm
believe?
gonna go control Epit.
I
I wanted people to think that he was either going to be the little girl at the beginning, the blonde girl, or the girl that she's with when she's telling Ariel to just, he's loving to fucking kill him. I didn't put anything super specific, like how she's poisoned. I did have her getting better in my draft, but I don't know. I think, I wanted it to just be like, oh, maybe something happened. Either she seems to be getting better, but then she doesn't. I don't know. But that's why I haven't been having, specific poisoning or anything.
Yeah, I didn't go with poisoning, but I didn't do this, but I kind of just ran out of words. But I was thinking about not saying it outright, but alluding to the fact that maybe Desiel feeling guilty about helping in the murder of children and being afraid of war the same way Areo did, that he killed her after Areo left the tent, but I didn't wind up doing that. I just kind of had her die of her wounds. But it's ambiguous enough that anyone could have done it still. If Preston reveals in the next chapter that, somebody did have a hand in it, that wouldn't shock me at all, and it wouldn't shock me if I only read my version and got to that.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the vibe I got.
so someone else in chat also brought up an important point. Why Obara should live is the secret code word coming from Arianne about that war means wait, and that what was the other code? It was like dragon or something. Basically, Obara's probably gonna be receiving Arianne's letter with the word war on it, and she's going to assume that she should go to war, and that's kind of Doran's plan with with the swapped code words. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
It was supposed to be war and dragon that had swapped meanings, as I recall.
Mhm.
Right? That war was actually supposed to mean that they were to stay, and dragon meant that they were going out, as I recall
yeah,
from Deeper Dorn
Yeah.
from ages ago.
yeah. And Preston was saying, like, in his video about it, was like, why would they do that? That seems like a really bad idea. It almost seems like if they got the word war, they would just go to war anyway, and that's kind of Doran's idea. Uh, that's kind of, I was thinking Doran was fully expecting Obara to beat Darkstar because Doran would know that Darkstar only has 8 men. But then he was also expecting Obara, who is a liability to all of Doran's plans. He was expecting her, now that she has a diminished force and she's possibly injured from her battle with Darkstar, she would get the war letter and then go to war and get herself killed and no longer be a liability. That's kind of what I was thinking. Doran was like, either I get Darkstar killed and Obara out of the way, or Obara dies and she's also out of the way and I can just take care of Darkstar myself because I have all this ammo against him.
Okay, so I found there's another reference about foreshadowing Obara receiving a letter from receiving a letter of war. Here's the quote. Doran says, "You might be right. I will send a word to you at Sunspear." And then Obara says, "So long as the word is war." Obara turned upon her heel and strode off as angrily as she could, back to the stables for a fresh horse and another headlong gallop down the road. It's in the Captain of Guards chapter. So she's expecting word of war, and she is planning on attacking Oldtown, I believe, if she receives a letter. And Arianne's also going to be sending a letter with the words war, with a code word war. So,
So this question then comes up: why do we think that Obara wants to attack Oldtown specifically?
hell if I
Especially
know.
with especially with Preston's discussion about how much faith is actually supposed to be a key role in the deeper Dornish plan, because he really does harp on the fact that the faith of the Seven does seem to play an important position with Dorne's greater plans for Westeros and for Dornish law potentially taking over Andal law and all that comes with that. So, what are y'all's theories for why Obara may lead an assault on Old Town specifically?
The Hightower man killed her lover. That's it. That's the reason. No. Probably has to do with like I don't know because we don't really even know where Hightower stands politically with any of like the current anything. It seems like we know that the Maesters and Septons are anti-dragon, but we don't really know where the Hightowers stand on it.
Yeah, the last major thing we get with the Hightowers is Gerald Hightower. And he's, you know, he's gone. Or at least to my knowledge, there may have been something in the books that I'm just not remembering.
We know that the Lord is like up in a tower and he's just reading books, so he probably has a glass handle and he's like doing stuff. Who knows? Samuel will know. Maybe that'll be like explained that like I don't know.
Obara doesn't really need like a master plan. She can just be a dumb idiot that wants blood and revenge.
That's very fair. But to go back to our discussion about the Hightowers, and I realize this is getting very off topic, I do believe that Allery Hightower's marriage to Mace Tyrell, is the first marriage that the Hightowers have actually had with the Tyrells that we've had in canon. So I do wonder what all is going on with that and how much that actually does impact whatever Lord Leighton is doing up there in Old Town. Because that is a very interesting detail that I only just picked up on after like rereading things several times. So
That is interesting because if the Maesters and the Hightowers are like closely connected and the faith is there in Old Town, and if we take to heart the Dornish master plan is about getting rid of the Lannisters, Mace Tyrell and Olenna Tyrell being involved in that, it could be that the Hightowers are like, we'll marry to the Tyrells, we'll join we'll join our houses and then we'll have an even stronger alliance against the Lannisters. Like it could be connected to Doran's whole thing. That could be that thread. I'm not sure.
I mean, if we look at the perspective of like I'm trying to think about. So where was Mason Robert's rebellion? He was basically not fighting Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He was doing a siege while Riverlands North and Robert were kicking fucking what's his name, Ares' ass, right? Even though he was supposedly sworn to Rhaegar and Ares. In reality, he was just planting his ass down at Storm's End and waiting out the war. I think maybe there's some aspect to like Hightower, because at that point he was already married to a Hightower.
I don't believe it ever mentions Hightower banners at Storm's End, interestingly. I don't believe it ever mentions Hightower banners in Robert's Rebellion, period. They stay at home, from everything I can gather, except for Gerald.
When was he married to Hightowers? When was he married to?
I don't believe we have any specific date for the marriage of Mace and Allery. But that could be an incredibly significant event that we could potentially use to go down multiple paths.
It would have to be around Robert's Rebellion, right?
It would have to
Somewhere
be.
around then.
Yeah, well, this was born in 273, so they would have been married at that point. And if we go with the theory that the Maesters were linking the powerful houses together through marriage, which is what was happening, then we could probably... This goes down a rabbit hole, because was there supposed to be like a fifth perspective or something like that? I heard a theory about that.
Yes, that was a very well thought out theory. The Lost Tyrell POV.
So by Robert's Rebellion, Willis would have been born, so he would have been, they would have been married. And so we don't really know, but if you look at it from the perspective of like, Hightowers probably want the kingship or ownership, but they're trying to sneak their way in, like they did with the Dance of the Dragons, and that's why they married Marjorie to Renly, and then now Marjorie to Tommen. Even though she is a Tyrell, she's Hightower on one side.
Well, here's the thing, because Preston has the whole theory about the Redwynes going over to Aegon's cause and sort of completely flipping the balance in the Reach, which I love that theory, and I think there's a lot of weight behind it. It's one of Preston's theories that he's done recently. But is there a world where they basically, the Reachers, the Redwynes, the Hightowers, make a play to Aegon that involves Marjorie being freed from the accusations that the vile Cersei Lannister has leveled against her, and made Aegon's queen again, bypassing Arianne, and just having the endless cycle of Marjorie being named queen just consistently repeated over and over again? Is that something that we could potentially see in the future? And I realize this is an off-topic discussion, but all the same.
Are you asking about their plan or what's likely to happen?
Where do we see that going just as the community? I would just be interested to get sort of like a litmus test on that.
My opinion, Marjorie gets found guilty. There is master plans from Hightower and Tyrell, but Aegon and Euron coming on and ruin them all.
I definitely can see how that would affect things. Like, the Battle of Blood is going to shake things up, especially if we have Obara or just Darkstar in general moving that direction. And yeah, Aegon, I think what will have to be discussed there is how much of Aegon's arrival is premeditated by the Redwynes, by the Martells, how much of it is actually touch and go. I think there's a lot left up to us, the readers, but also to us as the writers and helping out Preston and whatnot. So that's
I
just.
wouldn't say premeditated because, so one of the interesting things is a lot of people say, what are the most impactful moments in the whole series? And one of them is Tyrion's chess game with Aegon, where he convinces him to go west, and it kind of changes everything, right? I don't see that as being something people could foresee with the Golden Company coming across. It's kind of almost random, because, I mean, they've been there for generations. Why all of a sudden now they're going to come back again? Maybe you could foresee it, but I think Doran and Hightowers probably know what's going on, but didn't plan it.
No, it definitely does appear to be too soon. I don't think enough pieces are in place for anything like that to actually be planned in that way. I guess our challenge is just more how do we unravel that long thread, if that makes sense.
Which thread?
Just Aegon's arrival and the political fallout from his existence as it stands, and then also coupling that with the outcome of the Battle of Blood, the Battle of Steel, just how all of that is going to move forward. What are we?
I'll give my
Yeah.
opinion, and then I'll let someone else talk. My
Please.
perspective is that Euron conquers Oldtown with Kraken Aaron. We have Aegon and Golden Company sweep across most of the mainland and quickly consolidate power. Tyrells fall apart, especially after Margaery is found guilty. The wealth of Highgarden and Lannister and Casterly Rock all ends up in Aegon's hands. And there's also going to be Sweetrobin and his new kingship. Probably just, well, they're probably going to be invading the Riverlands.
Right.
So,
And see, that is what brings us back to that from last week, because how do we reconcile Littlefinger making that move that isolates that part of the kingdom? And I know we're just winding the clock back there to our previous discussion, but how
well,
will
he
that?
can pledge to anyone. He's basically saying that, Cersei and Tommen's a bastard. We're not paying any more taxes to the Lannisters and the Tyrells. And oh, look, here's Aegon. I can pledge to him. Dany shows up. They can pledge to them, or they can just chill and bunker down turtles, see what happens, and support the winter. And I'm gonna let someone else come on in. What do you guys think's gonna happen? Where do you think Preston's going with the southern plot? Because I do think he has the southern plot at least planned out.
That is a
Any
deafening
volunteers? Nope.
silence. That is a
Yeah, that's
deafening silence.
Yeah, sorry.
You know what?
I got...
I appreciate a nice long silence.
Yeah.
Probably the phrase Civil War, Euron coming in after the war is done, killing with your phrase, taking Harrenhal, proclaiming, he's already proclaimed himself king, probably coming to the court, I don't know, maybe probably just go to war with Egham, I don't know, maybe because Daenerys has to come to Westeros at some point, so if I have to say, his daughter probably is going to die, she's just going to leave Marine in fire and flames, and just, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen in Marine, she has to leave it. The way that it's looking right now, it definitely feels like the Dance of the Dragons might be like, instead of it just being Daenerys versus Egham, it might be Aegon, sorry, it might be Daenerys, Aegon, and Euron all fucking trying to kill each other, and then what's happening in the north is what's happening in the north. And so by the end of it, maybe like a dragon. Because the prevailing theory is that Euron's gonna get a dragon, right? He might just use Kraken. I don't know. Who knows? Like, my idea is that well, like Euron has to make alliances unless he's just wanting to be lord over corpses. Unless we all just agree that like he's allied with the others or something crazy like that, right? Like unless that's his perspective, then he's just preparing the Riverlands and the rest of Westeros to be corpses. So that when the others come down, they have like a fresh army and they can just take over the world.
Yeah, we know Preston did mention in a video about, I don't know, I think it was the Battle of Blood series. He mentioned
It might have been Alliances of Iron. I think
he mentioned that Euron wants to bring about the Long Night because he says we will feast before the Fall Night.
You know what's really interesting?
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. If Windsor is positioned as Egham versus Euron, and Egham kills Euron, and everyone's like, Egham is our king, he saved us from the evil, bastard fucking Brozai, and he's got Valyrian steel armor, and he's stolen a dragon from Daenerys, and he's our king, yay, and then Daenerys comes in with a bunch of stuff. I don't know. There's so many different positions.
I think Aegon winning is at the very least winning King's Landing is very, very likely. I think a brief Aegon kingship is definitely on the horizon.
I think it makes sense story-wise. It's just how does he get there? Like, he's currently outnumbered like 4-1. His armies are scattered. He's not seen real combat before. Yes, the Golden Company's good and it's fresh, but also it's still outnumbered. He might have a ton of allies, which a lot of people hint at, and that's kind of his only chance, but we don't really have any confirmation. I'm not saying he's going to get crushed right away, because that would just make no narrative sense, but I think people overestimate his ability to just roll up and take King's Landing, because King's Landing held against Stannis, and he had way more people, was an outstanding military commander, but he failed, so...
Yeah, I think somebody is going to have to pull. There's going to be some double crossings of Cersei and some subterfuge that causes that, because I mean he's still got Varys on his side, and we don't know who exactly is directly involved with Aegon or not. Like, we would assume that Doran is not, like, based on Preston's theories or not. Like, I don't think Doran and Aegon are in any sort of way allied, but it could also be enemy of my enemy is my friend type of deal. Like, Dorne could join up with Aegon for the purpose of getting rid of Cersei and then attempt to cannibalize Aegon after the fact.
Yeah, but if Egan is the son of his sister, then why would he cannibalize him? Aegon. But maybe he doesn't even necessarily believe Aegon is like actually that, and so just like Blackfire. And for like generations, Blackfires and Dorne should have been each other.
Yeah, I think there's some. It may have been. I'm trying to think where this came from, but I think there's at least some sort of evidence that Illyrio and Doran have met. So Doran may just know, like, that this Aegon's completely a fake. Or he may just be like, this is too convenient that at, like, this horrible political time, suddenly my nephew is alive. I don't find it likely that Doran believes who Aegon is who he says he is.
A few people have messaged me. Actually, hold on, give me 1 minute to read through this. She just sent me a big giant Yeah, basically, he's saying that Aegon takes over rather quickly, and then Dany swoops in and ruins everything. Aegon's actually a fine king, and then Dany comes in and ruins a whole bunch of stuff. Which I think that's pretty fair. Sorry, G, I didn't always perceived as a fine king.
Yeah, people have. I've seen that idea before that, like, Dany burning King's Landing from the show was, like, based upon her defeating Aegon. And the burning of King's Landing is not her intentionally, like, fucking everything up. It's, like, wildfire caches and stuff like that. So the perception of Dany as this horrible tyrant has shown up and killed our one true king. And so everybody thinks she's a mad queen when in reality she was stopping this the fake that came in. Yeah, Dany has horrible PR. I don't know. I'm gonna call you voiced because I don't know how to say your name.
G.
She has horrid PR.
So,
Honestly, that
yeah.
could be the title of the entire podcast. Dany has horrible PR.
So wrapping this down to I think we'll go back to, unless anyone objects, we'll go back to Dorne, talk a little bit about that, and then I think we'll wrap on up. My thinking is Dorne's plan. Do you guys think it's actually gonna work? And I'll my
If I
assumption of what Dorne's plan is that he's doing the Condisi philosophy. He's hoping everyone else kills each other. He's sending out Quentin and Arianne in order to fail and look like he's doing things, while in fact his armies are staying put in Dorne, waiting for everyone else to do the dance of the dragons.
if I may, I think I agree with the track that you're on, but I also feel that like with Aegon, he might find common cause. Like he might actually have to ditch a lot of this stuff that he's thought of and change gears. I'm not sure. I think the whole point of Doran's plan is that there's a lot of it. It's mysterious. It's contradicting. It's not going to work because it's so well thought out. Like Preston says, all well thought out theories and plans fail in the end. And I think that's going to happen here. Like it's going to be kind of a metaphor for he's got all these resources. He's got all the brain power he needs. It's just that war is an ugly thing, and because of that, it's not gonna end up well for him. He's probably going to just end up ruining his own country and his own family on like the altar of this false sense of revenge.
My thinking is that he's planning everybody, all of his kids, to fail, and then they're not going to. Like, they're just gonna all show up. Like, Quinn's gonna show up with a dragon, or Arianne's gonna do something ridiculous in the river, in the Stormlands. Probably won't marry Aegon or anything, but she'll. Basically, he's planning for them to fail, and then our POVs are gonna succeed and ruin his plans.
Okay,
Be
so
a lot of
I-
fun if he was like a final villain for the Dorne plots. But anyway, I'll yield the floor.
I think it'd be interesting if Quinton stole Viserion, or either Viserion or Rhaegal, and used that as a means to and pledged himself to Egham and then that kind of link that Dorne either had to accept that or just kind of. So that's where like Dorne plans and Bran laughs. I don't know. I thought of that. That was sort of funny. I don't think any of this shit's gonna work. I think. I
Yeah,
don't
so
know.
it's gonna
I'm just
fail,
trying
but the question is how spectacularly and in what way.
to.
I think there's gonna be a lot of failing upward and then sharp failing downward.
Who do you
Oh,
think's
Quentin,
gonna
you're
fail
back.
up?
You have a dragon?
Quentin comes back like half burned and scarred up, but with a dragon, and Doran is both furious and elated by it. I think Preston brought up there are a lot of parallels between Elia Sand and Lyanna. So I think it's possible that Doran sent Arianne fully intending a marriage pact to not work out, and then Aegon is going to hook up with Elia and wind up marrying her for the same reason that Robb Stark married Jane Westerling. I could
I don't
see
know if John
something to
Con
that
would let
effect.
that, but like John Con would have to go away. Elia
What
Sand
if-
I
is
don't
gonna
know.
mess things
Well,
up.
John Con's got grayscale is the thing.
Yo,
So we don't. I don't. I don't know what. I don't know how long John Con is going to hold on. That's a. I think longer than he probably should be able to, but his days are definitely numbered. Like he's definitely dying in wins.
I do think he should shake someone's hand as like a ruse and give him grayscale and cause panic in a castle. I think that'd be a fun
Yeah,
little subplot.
Yeah, he's got to be. He's the stone beast breathing fire. Is that what the vision was?
I don't know. The one from Bran, like the one Bran's vision from way back when.
It's either Bran's vision or it's not House of the Undying, but there's like a stone beast that breathes fire over everything.
There's a giant with a stone face with blood in its eyes. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, I think that's the mountain.
Yeah.
I think that's Robert Strong. I can't find it specifically right now, but there's one where there's like a stone beast that breathes fire, and I think that's an allusion to grayscale, and I think John Cunt's gonna start a big pandemic.
He should wear a mask. He should get vaccinated, man.
Yeah, he really should. He really should.
He's like, no, I gotta go I gotta go dine in.
Listen, if I can't breathe directly on the vegetables, how can I even go shopping?
Yeah, if I can't thumb the salad bar with my dirty hands, how am I supposed to live? This is the Seven Kingdoms. This isn't Essos.
Yeah.
We're free here. This is a free country.
This is a free country.
This
is a free feudalistic country. God damn it.
Oh my god.
I
really want. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm thinking of wrapping things up rather soon. I have a final question, but do you guys have any other things about the chapters you guys wanted to discuss, more specific to Areo II?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah. I need to do a second draft of all of the. I gotta turn fucking Areo into a sleuthing detective now.
Is there anything
Yeah.
about Preston's draft that you don't like at all and think should be changed?
Aside from the last line,
Sure, anything.
I don't really have much. It feels a little short plot-wise, but also the last few ones have been pretty long. Like, so that it's not really a problem. I think it's good as in content, characterization, and everything. Just the last line needs a little bit more clarity, but other than that, it's one of the better outlines.
Do you guys think Darkstar's bluff is kind of weak? He's bluffing to send a letter.
I think he's appealing to Areo specifically. I think if it was Obara, he would have a different bluff.
Yeah.
It is a weak bluff, but he's appealing specifically to Areo in this case.
So, I've had this idea, and I'm throwing this out there in case anyone is going to rewrite a chapter and listen. One of the things that this did bring up is just a minor point on how feudalism works, and why in feudalistic societies kings are generally weak. You know how in the show Joffrey talks about how why does every lord command their own army? It's basically because of things like what Darkstar is threatening. He's threatening to just hold up in his castle and say, screw you, whoever my lord is. I'm not paying any taxes. I'm just going to chill here. And what are you going to do to stop me? Nothing. I have a castle. Right? When all these little castles and all these little fiefs are around, it's difficult for centralized authority to just rule everything, unless you have giant fire-breathing lizards. So that's just sort of a point about that could be worked into any future chapters. Well, actually, not future chapters, this chapter. She says, true though this is extremely nitpicky, this is not the result of feudalism, this is a problem feudalism is trying to solve. Feudalism is trying to solve, centralized authority?
I think to an extent they're trying to centralize authority, but I also think feudalism is a system that does try to solve that, but then winds up inadvertently making it worse.
I feel like once there are enough castles sitting around that are easy to defend and big walled cities and stuff, feudalism kind of naturally comes out of it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean nobody proposed. You go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
No, I was gonna finish up the small council.
Yeah, you should.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. This is the second of the small council podcasts. I hope everyone has a wonderful day and good luck writing.